Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with Story 1. My manager disappeared but kept sending messages. The text came in at 3:47 a.m. Check the freezer temperature. I looked up from restocking cigarettes behind the counter, confused. Derek hadn't been in the store for 3 days. I'd been working the graveyard shift at Quick Stop for about 8 months when Derek stopped showing up. He was supposed to be there every night until 2 a.m., handling the deposit and helping with the busier evening crowd before things died down. Derek was reliable, almost obsessively so. He'd text me updates throughout my shift, reminding me about tasks, asking if I needed anything, sometimes just checking in. The first night he didn't show, I figured he was sick. But the texts kept coming right on schedule. I texted him back asking if he was okay, where he was, but got no response. Just more instructions, more reminders, like he was standing right there watching me work. I called our district manager, Janet, the next morning. She seemed surprised when I told her Derek hadn't been in. He submitted his shift reports, she said. I explained about the texts, how he was messaging me but not physically present. There was a long pause. Maybe he's working remotely on some projects. By the 4th night, the messages were getting more specific. Wipe down the coffee counter again. I looked over at the counter I'd just cleaned. It looked fine to me, but I wiped it again anyway. 20 minutes later, customer in aisle 3. I looked around the empty store. There was no one in aisle 3. There was no one anywhere except me. I started saving screenshots of the messages, thinking I'd show Janet when I called her back. But when I looked at my phone the next morning, the message thread with Derek showed only my texts to him. All of his messages were gone. I thought maybe I'd dreamed them, but I knew I hadn't. I'd responded to them, followed his instructions, cleaned things he'd told me to clean. The messages kept coming, always between midnight and 5 a.m., always about things happening in real time. Turn up the heat, but there were no customers. Someone's loitering by the dumpster. I looked out the back window and saw nothing but empty parking lot and streetlights. I started to think Derek might be watching the security cameras from home, sending me messages based on what he was seeing. It would explain how he knew what I was doing, where I was in the store, but it didn't explain why Janet thought he was still filing reports or why his messages disappeared from my phone. On my day off, I drove past Derek's apartment complex. His car wasn't in the parking lot. I knocked on his door, feeling ridiculous, but got no answer. His neighbor, an older woman walking her dog, stopped when she saw me. "You looking for Derek? Haven't seen him in over a week." That night, the messages were different, more urgent. "Check the back room." I walked to the stock room, flipping on the lights. Everything looked normal. Boxes of inventory, cleaning supplies, the safe where we kept extra cash. "Behind the water heater," came the next text. I squeezed into the narrow space behind the old water heater in the corner. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then my flashlight caught something metallic wedged between the wall and the heater. I pulled it out. Derek's phone, cracked screen dark, battery long dead. My hands were shaking as I stared at the phone. If Derek's phone was here dead, wedged behind a water heater, then who had been texting me for the past week? I called Janet immediately, even though it was 3 a.m. She answered on the 4th ring, groggy and irritated. I told her about the phone, about Derek being missing, about his neighbor saying he'd moved. She was quiet for a long time. "I need to ask you something," she finally said. "When you've been talking to Derek, filing these reports I've been getting," I asked. "The incident reports, end of shift summaries. They've been coming in every night from Derek's employee login." She paused. "Some of them are..." I felt cold. Comments about your behavior, your attitude, suggestions that you might be stealing or not following protocol. My phone buzzed with a new message. I looked down, and even though I knew Derek's phone was sitting dead in my hand, there was another text from his number. "She's getting suspicious. You should quit." I told Janet I had to go, hung up, and immediately called 911. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher while I waited for the police, but my phone kept buzzing. More messages from Derek's number, even though his actual phone sat lifeless on the counter beside me. The police arrived 20 minutes later. I showed them Derek's phone, told them everything about the messages, the missing person. They took a report, said they'd look into it. Before they left, one officer suggested I check with my manager about the security footage. I waited until the next morning to call Janet back. She accessed the cameras remotely, pulled up the footage from the night Derek disappeared. We watched him arrive for his shift, clock in, work normally until about 1 a.m. Then he went to the back room. The timestamp showed him going back there at 1:17 a.m. At 1:52 a.m., the back room door opened and Derek walked out. But something was wrong with the footage. Derek's movements were stuttering like a video with corrupted frames. He moved in jerky, unnatural motions to the front counter, then just stood there. For 3 hours until his shift was supposed to end, he stood motionless behind the register. At 5 a.m., the Derek on the footage walked to the time clock, punched out, and left through the front door. But his movements were all wrong. Too stiff, too precise, like someone imitating how Derek walked without quite getting it right. Janet and I watched the footage from every night since then. Every night at exactly 1:52 a.m., the back room door would open and that same stuttering version of Derek would walk out and stand behind the counter for the rest of the shift. Just standing there, never moving while I worked around him completely unaware. Janet whispered, but I knew I hadn't. I'd been alone every night, I was sure of it. Yet there he was on camera, standing in the same spot I'd walked past dozens of times. I quit that day, never went back, not even for my final paycheck. Janet told me later that they found Derek's body in the woods behind the shopping center 3 days after I left. The coroner estimated he'd been dead for 2 weeks. The thing is, I still get the messages sometimes, not every night, but often enough. Always between midnight and 5 a.m., always from Derek's number. They're different now, though. Less helpful, more personal. I've changed my number twice, but somehow the messages always find me. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed in the early morning hours, I wonder who's really sending them. Because Derek's dead, his phone is in police evidence, and according to the phone company, his account was closed the day his body was found. But every few nights, my phone still buzzes with a message from a dead man who knows exactly what I'm doing in the dark. Story 2. The cleaning crew that only worked in the dark. I heard them every night at exactly 2:17 a.m. The elevator would ding, doors would slide open, and footsteps would echo through the marble lobby 12 floors below me. Heavy cartwheels rolling across tile, the distant hum of vacuum cleaners, muffled voices discussing their route through the building. I'd been working security at the Meridian Tower for 6 weeks, and the routine was always the same. Sit at my desk in the lobby, monitor the camera feeds, do a building sweep every 2 hours. The cleaning crew arrived after midnight and finished before dawn. I never saw them come or go, never encountered them during my rounds, but I heard them working above me every single night. My supervisor, Bill, had been clear during training. The cleaning service has full access after hours. They know the building, they know their job. Your job is to stay put and monitor the cameras. Don't interfere with their work. Don't go upstairs while they're cleaning. It seemed reasonable enough. The building was 37 floors of law offices, accounting firms, and consulting companies. Plenty of work for a full crew. I'd see the results every morning when the day shift arrived. Pristine offices, emptied trash, vacuumed carpets. Whatever crew they had, they were thorough. The sounds were always the same pattern. They'd start on the top floors and work their way down. I'd hear vacuum cleaners, floor buffers, the squeak of cartwheels, occasionally voices, though never loud enough to make out words. Just the normal sounds of people doing their jobs efficiently and quietly. I tried to spot them on the security cameras during my first week, mostly out of curiosity. The building had cameras in every hallway, elevator, and common area, but whenever I switched to a floor where I could hear them working, the hallways were empty. Dark offices, closed doors, nothing moving except the occasional flicker of emergency lighting. I figured they must be working inside the individual offices, away from the hallway cameras. Made sense. That's where the real cleaning happened. The sound certainly suggested a full crew spread throughout multiple floors. Bill stopped by during my third week to check on things. I mentioned the cleaning crew, asked if there was a schedule I should know about in case of emergencies. He looked confused for a moment. Schedule? They've been cleaning this building the same way for 15 years. Same time, same routine. I just never see them on cameras, I said. Trust me, Bill said. They prefer it that way. Professional crew, very efficient. The first time I broke protocol was on a Thursday night in October. I'd been hearing them on the 14th floor for over an hour. Vacuums, cartwheels, what sounded like multiple people moving furniture. But I needed to check a motion sensor that had been triggering false alarms in the law offices up there. I took the elevator to 14, telling myself I'd be quick and quiet. The doors opened to complete silence. The hallway was dark except for emergency lighting, and I couldn't hear any cleaning sounds anymore. No equipment, no voices, no movement at all. I walked the entire floor, checking every office, every conference room. Nothing. No cleaning supplies, no vacuum cleaners, no people. Just empty offices with papers still scattered on desks, trash bins that looked like they hadn't been emptied in days. But 10 minutes earlier, I'd been hearing active cleaning happening on this exact floor. Back in the lobby, I checked the elevator logs on the security system. According to the records, the elevator hadn't moved from the lobby level all night. No one had used it to go to the 14th floor. But I'd just ridden it myself, and I definitely heard sounds coming from up there. I convinced myself there must be a service elevator I didn't know about. Maybe they used freight elevators or had access to floors through the parking garage. There had to be a logical explanation. The sounds continued every night, always the same pattern, always starting at 2:17 a.m. But now I was paying closer attention. I started mapping out which floors they were on based on what I could hear through the building's ventilation system. The sounds always moved in a logical progression. Top floors first, working down, finishing around 5 a.m. 3 weeks later, I tried again. This time I went to the 32nd floor where I'd been hearing vacuum cleaners for the past hour. Same result. Empty hallways, locked offices, no sign that anyone had been there recently. But as soon as I got back to the lobby, I could hear them working on the 30th floor. That's when I started to notice the pattern in the security footage. Every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., there would be a brief glitch in the camera feeds. Just a few seconds of static on all floors simultaneously, like a power surge or signal interruption. When the cameras came back online, everything looked normal. But that's when the cleaning sounds would start. I began staying awake all night, tracking the sounds more carefully. They were definitely moving through the building in a systematic way, but every floor I checked was empty and the cameras showed nothing but vacant hallways and dark offices. During my 7th week, I decided to camp out on a floor instead of just checking it briefly. I chose the 20th floor, waited until I heard them start working up there, then took the elevator up and hid in a supply closet with a view of the main hallway. For 2 hours, I sat in that closet listening to vacuum cleaners, cartwheels, and footsteps in the hallway just outside. Occasionally, I'd hear what sounded like office doors opening and closing, the rustle of trash bags, even muffled conversations between crew members. But every time I peeked out of the closet, the hallway was completely empty. I was starting to think I was losing my mind when I noticed something else. The sounds weren't quite right. Vacuum cleaners don't usually run continuously for 45 minutes straight. Cartwheels shouldn't squeak in exactly the same rhythm every night, and the voices, when I really listened, never seemed to form actual words. On my last night working at Meridian Tower, I broke every protocol Bill had given me. Instead of staying in the lobby, I positioned myself in the stairwell and followed the sounds as they moved through the building. From floor to floor, I tracked what I was hearing, always staying one floor behind. The sounds led me to the executive level on the 36th floor. This was where the building's management company had their offices, along with a few high-end tenants. I'd only been up there once during training, and it required special keycard access. I used my master security key and stepped onto the 36th floor at 4:23 a.m. The cleaning sounds were louder here, more intense. Multiple vacuum cleaners, furniture being moved, voices that almost sounded like words. But the floor was not empty like the others had been. Every office door was standing wide open, and inside each one the furniture had been rearranged into perfect, identical configurations. Desks pushed against windows, chairs stacked in precise pyramids. Filing cabinets moved to create narrow pathways that led deeper into each office. The sounds were coming from inside these rearranged offices, but I still couldn't see anyone making them. Vacuum cleaners hummed with no one operating them. Cartwheels squeaked across carpets with no carts in sight. Voices whispered conversations in a language that might not have been human. In the largest corner office, I found what looked like a break room setup. Folding chairs arranged in a perfect circle around a small table. On the table were items that definitely didn't belong in an office building. Old photographs of people I didn't recognize, handwritten notes in a script I couldn't read, and what appeared to be personal belongings. Watches, jewelry, wallets. I recognized one of the watches. It belonged to Marcus, the security guard who'd worked this shift before me. Bill had mentioned that Marcus quit suddenly, didn't even finish his last week. The voices were getting louder, and I realized they were coming from behind me now. I turned around to see all of the rearranged furniture beginning to move on its own, sliding back toward their original positions. Desks gliding across carpets, chairs unstacking themselves, filing cabinets rolling into place. I ran for the stairwell and didn't stop until I reached the lobby. By the time I got there, the building was completely silent. I checked the 36th floor on the security cameras, and everything looked normal. Offices arranged properly, doors closed, no sign of the scene I'd just witnessed. I called Bill from my cell phone and told him I was quitting effective immediately. He didn't seem surprised. "I'll have your replacement start tomorrow night," he said. "Don't worry about returning your keys." Later, I learned that Meridian Tower has a turnover rate of 100% for night security guards. Most quit within 2 months. The building management company has a permanent job posting for the position, and they pay significantly above market rate. I also learned that the building's cleaning contract was terminated in 2008 after several crew members went missing during a shift. The offices have been cleaned by the day staff ever since. But every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., something still goes through the motions of cleaning that building. And sometimes when I drive past Meridian Tower late at night, I can see lights moving behind the windows on floors that should be empty. I wonder what they're really cleaning up there, and what happens to the security guards who get too curious about their work. Story 3. I was the only nurse on the abandoned wing. The call button for room 447 went off at 3:17 a.m., same as every night for 3 weeks. I'd walk up the dark stairwell to the abandoned 4th floor, reset the button and head back down to continue my rounds on the active floors. Just a glitch in the old system, that's what everyone said. I'd been working nights at Riverside General for 8 months when budget cuts forced them to close the entire 4th floor. Used to be the cardiac wing, but they consolidated everything to the 2nd and 3rd floors and just sealed it off. Officially, anyway. The hospital administration still required a nurse to check the equipment up there once per shift, make sure nothing was leaking or malfunctioning. It was supposed to be a quick walkthrough. Check the defibrillator batteries, make sure the oxygen shutoffs were properly closed, verify that the medication refrigerators were still locked and empty. 5 minutes, maybe 10 if I was thorough. Just me, a flashlight, and 30 empty patient rooms. The 4th floor felt different from the rest of the hospital. Colder somehow, even though the heating system was still running. The nurses' station sat dark and abandoned. Computer monitors blank. Phones disconnected. Patient rooms stretched down 2 long hallways. Doors standing open to reveal stripped beds and bare walls where medical equipment used to hang. During my first week doing the checks, everything was routine. Walk the halls, test a few pieces of equipment, reset any alarms that had triggered during the day. The only sound was my footsteps echoing off empty walls and the distant hum of ventilation systems. Then room 447 started calling. The first night it happened, I assumed someone had accidentally bumped the call button while doing maintenance. These old systems were sensitive, and construction crews had been working on updating the electrical throughout the building. I walked into the room, pressed the reset button on the wall panel, and left. But it happened again the next night. Same room, same time. 3:17 a.m. exactly. I mentioned it to Dr. Patterson during shift change. He just shrugged. Old wiring. These buildings are full of shorts and crossed signals. By the 3rd week, it was routine. Every night at 3:17, my pager would beep with a call from the 4th floor. Room 447. I'd trudge upstairs, reset the button, and head back down. Sometimes I'd hear other sounds while I was up there. Settling noises, pipes expanding, the building breathing around me. Old hospitals make a lot of noise at night. The patient information board was still hanging in the hallway near the nurses' station. Most of the rooms showed blank nameplates where patients used to be listed, but a few still had old information that hadn't been cleared when they closed the wing. I asked about it during a staff meeting. Sarah, one of the day shift nurses, remembered Margaret Chen. "Sweet lady," she said, "was here for about 2 weeks with heart problems. This was, maybe 3 years ago. She passed away while she was here. Natural causes, nothing dramatic." I asked. Sarah thought for a moment. "I think it was late at night, early morning actually. I remember because I was covering nights that week and found her during morning rounds. Peaceful passing." I didn't think much more about it until I started paying attention to when exactly room 447's call button was triggering. Always 3:17 a.m., every single night. I began timing my rounds to arrive at the 4th floor a few minutes early just to see if I could catch whatever was setting it off. The night I decided to wait and watch, I positioned myself at the nurses' station with a clear view down the hallway toward room 447. At 3:15 a.m., the floor was completely silent. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across empty doorways, and I could see all the way to the end of the hall. At exactly 3:17, I watched the call light for room 447 illuminate above the doorway. No movement in the hallway, no sounds, nothing that could have triggered it. Just the sudden appearance of that soft red glow indicating a patient needed assistance. I walked down to the room, flashlight in hand, and stepped inside. The call button panel was lit up, showing an active call. I pressed reset, and the light went off. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something I'd never paid attention to before. The bed wasn't completely stripped like the others. There was still a pillow there and what looked like a thin blanket pulled up neatly as if someone had just made the bed for a patient. I pulled the blanket back, expecting to find nothing but a bare mattress. Instead, there was an indentation in the mattress, shaped like someone had been lying there. Not just any indentation, a specific shape, as if the same person had been lying in the same position long enough to leave a permanent impression. The next night, I came prepared with a camera. When the call button went off, I documented everything. The neat blanket, the pillow that shouldn't have been there, the impression in the mattress. But when I reviewed the photos later, they showed an empty, stripped bed like all the others. I started doing research on Margaret Chen during my breaks. Found her obituary in the local paper from 2019. October 15th, 2019. That was exactly 4 years ago, almost to the day. The obituary mentioned that Margaret had specifically requested to remain in room 447 during her stay, because the window faced east and she enjoyed watching the sunrise. Her family had honored her wish to stay in that room until the end. I realized I'd been resetting Margaret's call button every night for weeks, but I'd never actually looked out the window to see what she'd been watching. The next night, after pressing reset, I walked to the window in room 447 and looked out. The view faced the hospital's memorial garden where they'd planted trees and installed benches in memory of patients who'd passed away. Even in the darkness, I could make out the shapes of the memorial plaques and the small garden area where families could come to remember their loved ones. But there was something else visible from that window. In the memorial garden, sitting on one of the benches was the figure of an elderly woman. She appeared to be looking up at the 4th floor, at the exact window where I was standing. I blinked and looked again. The bench was empty. When I got home that morning, I called the hospital's administrative office and asked about the memorial garden. The receptionist confirmed that Margaret Chen's family had sponsored one of the memorial trees planted in 2020, about a year after she passed away. "It's the oak tree near the east side," she said. "Beautiful spot." That night, I brought a pair of binoculars with me to room 447. When the call button went off, I reset it as usual, then positioned myself by the window to watch the memorial garden. At first, I saw nothing but empty benches and shadows from the trees. Then at 3:22 a.m., I saw her clearly through the binoculars. An elderly woman in a hospital gown sitting on the bench beneath the oak tree, looking up at room 447. She appeared to be waiting for something, patient and calm. I watched for 10 minutes before she slowly stood up and began walking toward the hospital building. I lost sight of her as she moved closer, but a few minutes later I heard the elevator on the 4th floor ding softly. I turned around to see the call light for room 447 turn on again. This time, when I walked into the room, the impression in the mattress was deeper, more defined. The blanket was pulled up to where someone's chest would be, and the pillow showed the clear indentation of a head. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the bed that should have been empty, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then very quietly, I heard something that made my blood freeze, breathing. Slow, labored breathing, like someone with heart problems struggling for each breath. I left the room immediately and didn't go back upstairs for the rest of my shift. The call button kept going off every hour until dawn, but I ignored it. I spent the remaining hours of my shift researching hospital policies on room reassignments and patient records. What I found disturbed me more than anything else I'd experienced on that floor. According to the official records, room 447 had been Margaret Chen's room during her stay. But it had also been the room where 12 other cardiac patients had passed away over the past 15 years. All of them had died during night shifts, all between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. The room had been taken out of service 3 times due to equipment malfunctions and unexplained patient anxiety, but had always been put back into use due to bed shortages. When they closed the 4th floor, room 447 was the last room to be cleared. According to the maintenance logs, it took 3 separate attempts to remove all the equipment because items kept reappearing even after they'd been documented as removed. I put in for a transfer to day shift the following week. My supervisor was understanding. Night shift on cardiac floors can be emotionally draining, she said. Lots of people burn out. But before I left the night shift, I had one final encounter with room 447. On my last night, the call button didn't go off at 3:17. Instead, it activated at 3:22, right after I'd finished my final rounds. When I got to the room, the bed was fully made with clean linens, as if housekeeping had just prepared it for a new patient. There was a water pitcher on the bedside table and a small arrangement of flowers. Real flowers, fresh and fragrant. On the pillow was a handwritten note in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for checking on me. I never found out who left that note, or how fresh flowers and linens appeared in a sealed wing of the hospital. But I know that room 447's call button hasn't gone off since my last night on the 4th floor. Sometimes I drive past the hospital around 3:17 a.m., and I look up at the 4th floor windows. They're always dark now, but occasionally I think I see a figure standing at the window of room 447, looking out at the memorial garden where an oak tree grows in memory of a patient who just wanted to watch one more sunrise." Story 4. The gas station at mile marker 193. The barefoot man walked in at 4:23 a.m. and stood at the counter staring at me for 47 minutes. I kept my eyes down like Eddie had told me. Never looked directly at him, never acknowledged he was there. But I could feel him watching me, and I could hear him breathing. I'd taken the job at mile marker 193 because it was the only place hiring night shift within driving distance of my apartment. Remote location off Highway 9, about 20 minutes from the nearest town. Just me, a cash register, and the occasional trucker stopping for coffee and cigarettes during the long haul between cities. Eddie, the owner, was in his 70s and had been running the place for 30 years. During my training, he gave me the standard instructions. Keep the coffee fresh, watch for shoplifters, call if there were any problems. Then, as I was about to leave, he added something else. "One more thing," he said, not looking at me directly. "Sometimes you get customers who come in without shoes. Doesn't matter what they say or do, you don't acknowledge them. Keep your eyes down, do your work, act like they're not there." I thought he was joking. Exactly what I said. No shoes, no socks, just bare feet. Could be middle of winter, could be summer, doesn't matter. They come in, they stand around, they might try to get your attention. You ignore them completely. Don't make eye contact, don't speak to them, don't ring them up if they bring something to the counter. Eddie was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the empty highway. "The night shift guy before you didn't follow that rule, had to close the store for 3 weeks while we cleaned things up. My first 2 weeks were completely normal. Truckers, late-night travelers, the occasional local heading home from a bar. Everyone wore shoes. I started thinking Eddie's warning was just some weird rural superstition, maybe a way to mess with the new guy. Then on my 15th night, I heard the door chime at 3:47 a.m. and looked up to see a middle-aged man in jeans and a flannel shirt walking toward the counter. Normal customer, except when I glanced down, I could see his feet were completely bare. No shoes, no socks, just pale skin against the dirty linoleum floor. I remembered Eddie's instructions and kept my eyes focused on the magazine I was reading. The man stood at the counter for about 5 minutes, not saying anything, just breathing loudly through his nose. Then he walked around the store for a while and I could hear his footsteps, the soft slap of bare feet on tile. Eventually, the door chimed again and he left. It happened twice more that week. Different people each time, but always barefoot, always silent. They'd come in, browse around, stand at the counter staring at me, then leave. I followed Eddie's rule and never acknowledged them. The fourth time was different. It was a woman in her 30s wearing a business suit that looked expensive. She walked in around 2 a.m., went straight to the counter and stood there looking at me. Like the others, she was barefoot, her feet dirty as if she'd walked a long distance on pavement. But this one talked. "Excuse me," she said in a perfectly normal voice. I kept reading my magazine, pretending I couldn't hear her. "I know you can see me," she continued. "I really need your help." I turned a page, focusing on an article about baseball statistics. "Please," she said, and her voice had taken on a pleading quality. "Just look at me. That's all I need." For 40 minutes, she stood there talking to me, asking for help, begging me to acknowledge her. Her voice never changed, always polite, always reasonable, like someone who genuinely needed assistance. But I kept my eyes down and my mouth shut. When she finally left, I realized I was shaking. I called Eddie the next morning to ask about the barefoot customers. He sighed heavily. 4. Just for me to look at her, I think. She seemed... Good thing you didn't. They always want eye contact first. What are they, Eddie? Another long pause. Honestly, I don't know exactly what they are. Been happening since I opened this place. Local sheriff thinks it's just people on drugs wandering around confused, but people on drugs wear shoes, you know? Marcus, good kid, worked here for about 6 months. One night, around 3 a.m., barefoot guy comes in. Marcus looks right at him, starts trying to help him find something. Marcus spent about 2 hours helping this guy look for something that didn't exist, searching every aisle, checking behind products, even went into the storage room with him. Camera shows Marcus moving around the store, but he's moving wrong. Eddie went quiet for a moment. When I found Marcus the next morning, he was standing in the storage room, staring at the wall. Hadn't moved in hours, couldn't speak, couldn't respond to his name. He recovered after a few weeks in the hospital, but he doesn't remember anything from that night. Claims he never saw anyone barefoot, says he was alone the whole shift. The barefoot customers kept coming, usually 2 or 3 times a week. Always after 2 a.m., always trying to get my attention in some way. Some were silent, some talked. Some even tried to buy things by leaving money on the counter next to items they'd selected. I ignored them all, but it was getting harder to pretend they weren't there. They were becoming more persistent, more creative in their attempts to make me acknowledge them. One brought a crying baby and stood at the counter asking for help. Another pretended to have a medical emergency, collapsing dramatically near the drink coolers. A few started following me around the store as I restocked shelves, staying just at the edge of my vision. The worst was the old man who came in during my 7th week. He didn't try to get my attention at all. Instead, he just stood by the front window, facing out toward the highway, completely motionless. He stayed there for 3 hours, from 2 a.m. until dawn, never moving, never making a sound. When the sun came up and my shift ended, he was still there. I had to walk past him to leave, and even though I kept my eyes straight ahead, I could feel him watching me as I passed. That night, I decided to check the security footage to see what these encounters looked like from an outside perspective. Eddie had given me access to review the cameras for inventory and safety purposes. What I saw on the recordings confused me more than anything I'd experienced so far. The footage showed me working alone, stocking shelves, reading magazines, doing normal night shift activities. But there were long periods where I stood completely still, staring at empty spaces in the store. Sometimes for 5 or 10 minutes at a time, sometimes for over an hour. In the recording from the night with the businesswoman, I watched myself stand behind the counter for 40 minutes, looking down at something and occasionally turning pages. But there was no magazine visible in my hands. I was just making the motions of reading while staring at the empty counter. The night with the old man by the window showed me restocking shelves while carefully moving around an area near the front of the store, as if navigating around a person who wasn't there. According to the security cameras, I'd been alone every single night. No barefoot customers, no mysterious visitors, just me, acting strangely, responding to people who didn't exist. But I knew what I'd experienced. I remembered their faces, their voices, the sound of bare feet on linoleum, the woman's desperate pleading, the old man's silent vigil by the window, the feeling of being watched and evaluated by something that wanted me to break Eddie's rule. I quit the next day, told Eddie I'd found something closer to home, didn't mention the security footage or my growing certainty that something was very wrong with mile marker 193. He didn't seem surprised. "That's pretty good." He paused. "Don't know for sure. Highway department says there used to be a psychiatric hospital about 10 miles up the road, closed down in the 80s. Patients weren't treated well. A lot of them died there." He handed me my final paycheck. "Others think it's something else entirely, something about that stretch of highway that attracts things that shouldn't exist." I drove past mile marker 193 a few months later, just curious to see if it was still operating. The station was boarded up with a "for sale" sign in the parking lot. According to the sign, it had been closed for over a year. But as I slowed down to read the sign, I noticed fresh tire tracks in the gravel parking lot, and the light in the front window was on. Through the dusty glass, I could see someone moving around inside. Someone restocking shelves, working the night shift in a store that was supposed to be abandoned. I didn't stop to get a closer look. Some rules are worth following, even after you quit the job. Story 5. My coworker clocked in, but never came inside. Marcus had been dead for 3 weeks, but his time card showed he was working right beside me every night. According to the system, he took his breaks on schedule, moved between sections exactly when he was supposed to, and even clocked out for lunch at 3 a.m. I was completely alone in that warehouse, but somehow Marcus was logging 40 hours a week. I started working at Hartwell Distribution in November, part of their night crew that handled inventory and restocking. The warehouse was massive, probably the size of 4 football fields, with rows of shelving that stretched up 3 stories high. Most nights it was just me and Marcus working different sections, keeping the day shift supplied with whatever they needed to load trucks. Marcus was quiet, maybe 50 years old, been working there for 8 years. We'd clock in at 11 p.m., wave to each other across the warehouse floor, then head to our assigned areas. Our manager, Janet, worked days, so we were pretty much unsupervised. As long as the work got done and inventory counts matched up in the morning, nobody bothered us. It was good work, steady, predictable, and quiet enough that I could listen to podcasts while I worked. The first night Marcus didn't show up was a Tuesday in December. I clocked in at 11, looked around for him, figured he was running late. But his car wasn't in the parking lot, and he didn't answer when I texted him. By midnight, I called Janet to report that he hadn't come in. "That's weird," she said. "The system shows he clocked in at 10:58. I walked the entire warehouse, checking every section, every break room, every bathroom. "I'm positive." "Let me check the time logs remotely," Janet said. I could hear her typing. "It shows Marcus in section H right now, logged in as actively working." I walked over to section H. Nobody there, just rows of shelving filled with auto parts and boxes of industrial supplies. "Janet, I'm standing in section H. This is strange. The system shows both of you logged in and active. Maybe he's using the restroom?" But I'd checked the restrooms. I'd checked everywhere. I was alone in the warehouse. But according to the computer system, Marcus was there working his normal shift. The next morning, Janet pulled the security footage to see what had happened. The cameras showed me arriving at 11 p.m., clocking in, working alone in my assigned sections. But the employee tracking system continued to show Marcus as present and active throughout the shift. His time card recorded 8 hours of work, complete with break times and section transfers. "I'll call Marcus at home," Janet said. She tried calling him all day. No answer at home. No response to voicemails. Cell phone went straight to voicemail. By the end of the week, Janet was worried enough to ask for a wellness check. The police found Marcus in his apartment. He'd been dead for at least a week, possibly longer. Natural causes, the coroner said. Heart attack, probably happened in his sleep. But his body had been there long enough that he'd clearly died before that Tuesday when the system showed him working alongside me. Janet was understandably shaken. I don't understand how the system kept logging him as present, but the system glitches continued. Every night, Marcus would clock in at 10:58 p.m. just like always. The tracking system would show him moving between sections, taking breaks, completing his assigned tasks. I'd be working alone, but according to the computers, Marcus was right there with me. It came in to examine the time clock system. They found nothing wrong with the hardware or software. The card reader was functioning normally. The GPS tracking was accurate for my movements. And there were no database errors. As far as the system was concerned, Marcus was showing up for work every day. "It's probably cached data," the IT guy explained. "Sometimes these systems hold on to old patterns and replay them automatically." They deactivated Marcus's employee ID, deleted his profile from the system, and issued me a new keycard with updated access permissions. Problem solved. Except the next night, Marcus clocked in again. Same time, same routine, same movement patterns through the warehouse. The system was tracking an employee who didn't exist anymore, using an ID that had been deactivated. That's when the messages started. I stared at the message, feeling cold. Marcus's phone had been found in his apartment when police discovered his body. There was no way he could be texting me. I walked over to Section K anyway. Nobody there, no forklift running. But my phone buzzed again. "Thanks." Over the next few nights, the messages became more frequent. Always work-related, always in Marcus's typical style, brief, practical, focused on the tasks at hand. I started responding to the messages partly out of curiosity and partly because they felt so normal. It felt like working with Marcus again, except he wasn't physically there. Janet noticed that productivity had actually improved since Marcus's death. "You're getting through both sections every night," she said during one of our check-ins. But I wasn't handling it alone. Every morning, both sections were completed, my section and Marcus's section. I was only working my assigned areas, but somehow his areas were getting done too. Inventory was moved, shelves were restocked. Everything was organized exactly the way Marcus used to do it. I started paying closer attention to the sections where Marcus was supposed to be working. I'd find pallets that had been moved since the beginning of my shift, boxes that were restocked in his precise, methodical style. But I never saw anything being moved, never heard the forklift running in his section. 3 weeks after Marcus's death, I decided to camp out near Section K and watch for any signs of activity. I positioned myself where I could see the main aisles and waited. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. "Working late tonight." I looked toward Section K and saw nothing. But I could hear something. The distant sound of boxes being moved, the squeak of cartwheels, the soft beep of a scanner reading barcodes. All the sounds of someone doing inventory work coming from an area where no one was visible. I crept closer, following the sounds. They seemed to stay just ahead of me, always in the next aisle over, always just out of sight. But I could see the results of the work. Shelves being organized, products arranged in neat rows, empty spaces filled with new inventory. My phone buzzed again. "You don't need to check on me." I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. Another message. "Go back to your section." I stood there in the semi-darkness of the warehouse, surrounded by towering shelves and the distant hum of ventilation systems, texting with my dead coworker, who was apparently still coming to work every night. I typed. The response came immediately. "Just doing my job." "Dead, I know." I didn't know how to respond to that. We'd never talked much when Marcus was alive, but this felt like the longest conversation we'd ever had. I typed, feeling ridiculous for asking. "Better than okay. No more back pain, no more getting tired. I can work all night without breaks now." That should have been comforting somehow, but it wasn't. There was something wrong about Marcus continuing to work in the warehouse after death, still clocking in every night, still following the same routine he'd maintained for 8 years. I asked. The response took several minutes. "Don't know. This is where I've been coming every night for 8 years." Over the following weeks, I developed a strange working relationship with Ghost Marcus. He'd text me about work issues, help coordinate tasks that required 2 people, even cover for me when I needed longer breaks. The warehouse ran more efficiently than it ever had, but I started to notice that Marcus wasn't quite the same as he'd been when he was alive. His messages were becoming more frequent, more detailed, more possessive about the warehouse. Someone moved the inventory sheets in Section C. The day shift left a mess in the break room again. "New employee starts Monday." Janet had hired someone to help with the increased workload, a guy named Tyler who would start the following week. I was supposed to train him, show him the ropes, help him get comfortable with the night shift routine. The night before Tyler's first day, I got a message from Marcus. "He won't work out," I typed back. "Some people don't belong on the night shift, they don't understand the work." Tyler lasted 3 nights. On his 4th shift, he came to me around 2 a.m., visibly shaken. "There's someone else in this building," he said. I tried to explain about the system glitches, the phantom time cards, the old employee data that was still in the computers. But Tyler wasn't buying it. "I saw someone," he insisted. "Just for a second in my peripheral vision. Middle-aged guy wearing the company uniform." Tyler quit at the end of that shift. Just walked out, said he'd find something else. The next night, I got a message from Marcus. "Told you he wouldn't work out." I realized that Marcus wasn't just lingering in the warehouse. He was actively discouraging other people from working there. He wanted to keep things the way they'd always been. Just him and one other person working quietly through the night, maintaining the routine that had defined his life for 8 years. I put in my 2 weeks' notice the next day. Told Janet I'd found a better opportunity closer to home. She was disappointed but understanding. "Night shift work isn't for everyone," she said. On my last night, Marcus and I exchanged more messages than we ever had when he was alive. He texted, "Yeah, I'll miss it too, Marcus." A long pause, then, "I don't know how. Maybe that's the problem." I didn't have an answer for that. At 7 a.m., I clocked out for the last time and left my keycard and uniform in Janet's office. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with one final message from Marcus. "Thanks for everything." The warehouse went through 4 more night shift employees over the next 6 months before Janet finally hired a full-day crew and eliminated the night shift entirely. But I heard from a friend who still works there that sometimes when the day shift employees work late, they hear sounds coming from the empty sections. Boxes being moved, carts rolling down aisles, the soft beep of inventory scanners. And occasionally, maintenance workers find that someone has been organizing inventory overnight, completing tasks that weren't scheduled, maintaining the warehouse exactly the way it was maintained for 8 years by a man who apparently never learned how to stop coming to work. Story 6. The voicemails from the basement extension. The phone calls started coming from extension 019 about a week after I began working nights at Citywide Taxi. Always around 1 a.m., always from the basement level that had been sealed off for 15 years due to flooding damage. I'd let them go to voicemail like dispatch protocol required, but the messages were getting longer and they were starting to say my name. Citywide operated out of a 4-story building downtown that used to be a department store in the 1960s. The main dispatch center was on the 2nd floor, with driver break rooms and offices scattered throughout the building. The basement had been flooded during a major storm in 2009 and never properly renovated. Too expensive to repair, management said, so they just sealed it off and worked around it. I took the night dispatch job because it paid better than anything else I could find with my experience. Midnight to 8 a.m., fielding calls from customers and coordinating with drivers spread across the city. Most nights were routine. Drunk people needing rides home, airport runs, the occasional emergency medical transport. The building was mostly empty during my shift. A few drivers would come in to use the restrooms or grab coffee, but usually it was just me on the 2nd floor, answering phones and watching the GPS tracking system that showed where all our active cars were located. My supervisor, Carol, had been with Citywide for 23 years and knew everything about the building's quirks. During my training, she walked me through the phone system and pointed out the extension list posted next to my workstation. Extensions 001 through 0018 are active, she explained. Driver break rooms, offices, conference room. If you get calls from any other extensions, just let them go to voicemail, I asked. Used to be additional dispatch and driver coordination when we had a bigger operation. Been out of service since the flood. Phone company says it's disconnected, but sometimes the old equipment still tries to complete calls. My first 2 weeks were completely normal. I handled customer calls, dispatched drivers, processed payments. The work was straightforward and I got comfortable with the routine quickly. The building made typical old building noises at night, settling, pipes expanding, heating system cycling on and off. Then during my 3rd week, the phone rang at 1:17 a.m. I followed protocol and let it go to voicemail. In the morning, I checked the messages and found a recording that lasted about 30 seconds. Just breathing sounds, some static, and what might have been footsteps echoing in a large, empty space. Carol wasn't concerned when I mentioned it. Happens every few months. Old building, old wiring. The calls continued, always around the same time, always from extension 019. I developed a routine. Let it ring through to voicemail. Delete the message in the morning without listening to it. Just background noise and dead air anyway. But after a few weeks, I got curious and started listening to the voicemails before deleting them. They were getting longer. What started as 30-second recordings of static and breathing had stretched to 2 or 3 minutes. And they weren't just random noise anymore. I could hear what sounded like someone moving around in a large space, occasionally bumping into objects, sometimes muttering under their breath too quietly to make out words. One night, the message was different. Instead of just movement sounds, I could clearly hear someone trying to speak. Dispatch. Need. I called Carol at home, even though it was 3 a.m. She answered groggily but became more alert when I explained about the clearer voice message. She asked, "I'll listen to it when I come in tomorrow." The next evening, Carol pulled up the voicemail system to listen to the recording, but when we accessed extension 019's messages, the folder was empty. "That's strange," she said, frowning at the computer screen. I listened to it twice. Maybe it auto-deleted due to storage limits. She made a note to have the IT contractor look into it. The calls kept coming and now I was paying closer attention. I started keeping a notebook, writing down the exact time of each call and brief notes about what I heard in the messages. 1:17 a.m. Voice saying dispatch and help, background sounds like dripping water. 1:19 a.m. Longer message, someone walking around, trying door handles, muttering locked repeatedly. Followed by what sounded like someone climbing stairs. The messages were becoming more coherent, more urgent, and more specifically directed at the dispatch center. Someone was trying to reach us from the sealed basement, asking for help, looking for a way out, but that was impossible. The basement had been flooded and abandoned for 15 years. The stairwell access was locked and had been since the renovation decision was made. Nobody could be down there. I started researching the building's history during my breaks. The basement level had originally housed additional dispatch operations, driver break rooms, and administrative offices. During the 2009 flood, the entire level had taken on 4 feet of water in a matter of hours due to overwhelmed storm drains. Most of the equipment was destroyed, and the company decided it was more cost-effective to consolidate operations on the upper floors rather than repair the water damage. The basement was pumped out, cleaned as much as possible, and then sealed off. But I found something interesting in the old employee records. During the flood, one night shift employee, Robert Chen, had been working in the basement dispatch center when the water started rising. According to the incident reports, he'd called upstairs to report flooding, then communication was lost. Emergency responders found the building evacuated the next morning, but Robert was never located. His car was still in the parking lot, his personal belongings were still at his workstation, but he was nowhere in the building. The assumption was that he'd evacuated through a different exit and gone home without checking in with management. But Robert never showed up for his next shift, never called in, never contacted the company again. His family reported him missing after a week. The police investigation concluded that he'd likely left town for personal reasons and simply abandoned his job without notice. It happened sometimes. People just disappeared from their lives and started over somewhere else. 2 weeks after I found the information about Robert, the voicemail messages became unmistakably clear. This is Robert Chen, employee ID 22847, calling from the basement dispatch center. I've been trying to reach someone upstairs for help. The water is gone now, but all the doors are locked. I can't find a way out. I called Carol immediately, even though it was 2 a.m. Carol, you need to hear this. There was a long silence. That's not possible. I know, but listen to this message. Carol agreed to come in early to listen to the voicemail, but when we tried to access it the next morning, the message was gone again. The system showed a call had been received, but no recording was available. This is getting ridiculous, Carol said. But before she could make the call, we heard something that made us both freeze. From somewhere below us, muffled by floors and walls but clearly audible, came the sound of a phone ringing. Extension 099 ringing in the sealed basement. We looked at each other, then at the phone system display. No incoming call was showing on the board, but we could hear the phone ringing somewhere beneath our feet, echoing through the building's structure. Carol found the master key to the basement access door. We'd never actually seen the sealed level. It had been locked off since before either of us worked at Citywide. The stairwell was dark and smelled like old water damage. Carol unlocked the door and pushed it open. The basement was exactly as it had been left 15 years ago, but preserved in a way that didn't make sense. Desks still held paperwork, computer monitors sat ready for use. Coffee cups remained on workstations as if their owners had just stepped away. but everything was covered in a thin layer of what looked like dried mud, and the air had a strange, stagnant quality that made it difficult to breathe. In the far corner, we found the basement dispatch center. One workstation was still active, computer running, phone system operational, a logbook open to entries from October 2009. The most recent entry, written in careful handwriting, was dated the night of the flood. Water rising rapidly, called upstairs for evacuation assistance, no response. Below that, in the same handwriting but more hurried, were dozens of additional entries, all dated after the flood, spanning 15 years of night shifts. Day 15. Still calling upstairs, no answer. Day 847. New night dispatcher started. Day 2091. Getting better at making the calls go through. Day 4783. Told her my name. The final entry was from the previous night. Day 5479. Carol is coming down to help. We found Robert's body in the break room, slumped over a table where he'd apparently been waiting. The coroner later determined he'd died of dehydration and exposure. Probably within a few days of the flood, he'd been trapped in the basement for 15 years, but his body showed he'd only survived for about a week. The phone company confirmed that extension 019 had never been properly disconnected. It remained active in their system, powered by backup circuits that had continued functioning even after the basement was sealed. But they couldn't explain how calls had been made from that extension for 15 years after Robert's death, or how his voice had been recorded on messages that disappeared before anyone else could hear them. We moved Citywide's operations to a different building within 6 months. The old department store was eventually demolished, but I heard from Carol that construction workers found something strange when they cleared the basement level. Robert's workstation was still running when they cut power to the building. The computer showed he'd been logging dispatch calls every night for 15 years, coordinating with drivers who didn't exist, taking messages from customers who hadn't called, and in the phone system's memory they found thousands of voicemails, 15 years worth of messages from extension 019, all asking for help, all trying to reach someone upstairs who could unlock the doors and let Robert Chen finally go home. Story 7. I watched someone walk past the camera 12 times. By the 12th time he walked past camera 08, I could see his face clearly. It was David, the security guard who died at this same desk 3 months ago. He was getting closer to the camera with each pass, and I realized he was walking toward me. I'd been working overnight security at Corporate Park West for about 6 weeks when it happened. The job was straightforward. Monitor 16 buildings spread across a business campus, watch over 100 security cameras, and do periodic checks of the central alarm system. Most nights, nothing happened. Just empty hallways, parking lots, and the occasional maintenance worker or cleaning crew. The security office was located in Building A, with a wall of monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the complex. Each building had multiple cameras covering entrances, elevators, hallways, and parking areas. The system was sophisticated, with motion detection alerts and automatic recording of any unusual activity. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and I was usually alone except for the cleaning crews that came through various buildings between 2 and 4 a.m. Standard corporate campus security, boring but steady work, good benefits, and plenty of downtime to read or study between patrols. The previous guard, David Martinez, had worked the position for 8 years before suffering a fatal heart attack right at the security desk. Management found him the next morning during shift change. He was 52, apparently had some underlying heart condition he didn't know about. Sudden cardiac death, the coroner said, could happen to anyone. David had been well liked from what I heard. Reliable, thorough, took pride in keeping the corporate campus secure. His wife mentioned during the funeral that he'd often talked about how much he enjoyed the quiet nights, the sense of responsibility for protecting the businesses and people who worked there. My first month on the job was completely routine. I learned the camera positions, the building layouts, the normal patterns of after-hours activity. Cleaning crews in buildings C and F on Mondays and Thursdays. Maintenance workers occasionally checking HVAC systems. Delivery trucks arriving early for morning business. The motion detection system would alert me to any activity, and I'd switch to the relevant camera to verify everything was normal. Usually it was just cleaning staff or the occasional security light being triggered by an animal in the parking lot. Then, on a Tuesday night in October, camera 08 in Building C triggered a motion alert at 2:47 a.m. I switched to that feed and saw a man in a dark jacket walking down the hallway past the camera. Nothing unusual. Could have been maintenance, late working employee, or someone from the cleaning crew. He was moving at a normal pace, appeared to be heading toward the elevator bank. 23 minutes later, the same camera triggered another alert. The same man wearing the same dark jacket walking past the camera in the same direction at the same pace. I checked the other cameras in Building C to see where he was going, but couldn't spot him anywhere else in the building. The elevator cameras showed no activity, the stairwell cameras were clear, and the entrance cameras hadn't recorded anyone entering or leaving. 18 minutes later, camera 08 triggered again. Same man, same jacket, same walking pace, same direction. I started paying closer attention, keeping camera 08 on my main monitor while cycling through other feeds. Over the next 2 hours, the man walked past that camera 7 more times. Always the same interval, between 18 and 25 minutes apart. Always moving in the same direction, always at the exact same pace, but I couldn't find him anywhere else in the building. I called my supervisor, Glenn, at home around 4 a.m. "Probably maintenance working on something specific," Glenn said groggily. I accessed the maintenance database. No work orders for Building C that night, no scheduled activities, no authorized personnel logged in for after-hours access. "Glenn, this guy has walked past the same camera 10 times in 2 hours, same exact route each time." There was a pause. 10 times? That doesn't make sense. Same jacket, same walking speed, same direction every time. I paused, studying the figure on camera 08 as he made his 11th pass. I'd been watching carefully enough to notice the pattern. The first few times, the man had been walking near the far wall of the hallway. Each subsequent pass, he was walking a little closer to the camera position, as if he was gradually moving across the width of the hallway with each circuit. First few times, he was maybe 15 feet from the camera. Now he's about 8 feet away. Glenn was quiet for a long moment. "I'm coming in." But before Glenn arrived, the man made his 12th pass by camera 08. This time, he stopped directly in front of the camera and looked up at it. I could see his face clearly for the first time, and my blood went cold. It was David Martinez, the guard who died at this desk 3 months ago. He was wearing the same dark security jacket that was part of our uniform, and he was staring directly into the camera with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. He stood there for almost a minute, looking up at the camera, then slowly raised his hand and pointed toward the security office, toward me. Then he turned and walked out of the camera's view, and I never saw him on any feed again that night. Glenn arrived 20 minutes later and found me sitting at the desk, shaking and unable to explain what I'd witnessed. I showed him the recorded footage from camera 08, but when we reviewed it, the video showed an empty hallway all night long. "There's nothing here," Glenn said, fast-forwarding through the timestamp where I'd seen David walking past the camera 12 times. "That's impossible. I watched him for 2 hours. Glenn checked the motion detection logs. Camera 08 had triggered alerts at exactly the times I'd written down. but the corresponding video showed no movement, no person, just an empty hallway with normal lighting. Glenn suggested. But I knew I hadn't been asleep. I'd been taking notes, timing the intervals, tracking the man's movement across the hallway. I'd watched David Martinez point directly at me through the camera. Over the next few nights, I paid special attention to camera 008, but nothing unusual happened. Normal building activity, cleaning crews, occasional maintenance workers. No sign of David, no motion alerts during the late night hours. I started researching David's work history, trying to understand what might have happened that night. I found his old shift logs in the security office files, detailed records of his 8 years monitoring the campus. David had been meticulous about documenting unusual events. His logs showed regular notes about after-hours activities, maintenance work, cleaning schedules, anything that might be relevant to security. He'd clearly taken the job seriously and maintained careful records of everything he observed. In his final month of logs, I found something interesting. David had noted several instances of unusual movement patterns in Building C, specifically around camera 08. According to his notes, he'd observed someone walking past that camera repeatedly on multiple nights, always following the same route, always during the same time period. His last entry from the night before he died read, "Camera 08 anomaly continues. Subject appears to be security personnel based on uniform but no authorized personnel scheduled for Building C patrol, unable to identify individual or track movement through other camera positions." David had been seeing the same thing I'd witnessed. Someone in a security uniform walking past camera 08, over and over, getting closer to the camera with each pass. But according to the video archives, camera 08 had never recorded any unusual activity during David's shifts either. Whatever he'd been seeing, just like what I'd seen, wasn't showing up on the recorded footage. I realized that David had been watching himself. For weeks before his death, he'd been observing his own future ghost walking the same route he would walk after he died, getting closer to the camera each time until finally stopping to point toward the security desk where his body would be found. The next night, I paid careful attention to all the cameras during the hours when David had logged his unusual movement observations. At 2:47 a.m., camera 08 triggered a motion alert. This time, I saw 2 figures walking past the camera. David in his dark security jacket walking the route I'd observed before, but walking beside him was another man in an identical security uniform. The second man looked exactly like me. I watched myself walk past camera 08 alongside David's ghost, both of us moving at the same pace, both heading toward some destination I couldn't see on any other camera. We were walking the same patrol route David had walked for 8 years. The route I'd been walking for 6 weeks, the route that apparently continued even after death. I quit the next morning and never went back to Corporate Park West. Glenn wasn't surprised. Apparently they had high turnover for the overnight security position. Most guards lasted about 2 months before finding other work. But I heard from a friend who works in the area that Corporate Park West is always hiring for overnight security. They've gone through 12 guards in the past year, and they're offering significantly above market wages to attract candidates. I also heard that the current guard, whoever he is, has been reporting unusual activity on camera 08. Someone in a security uniform walking past the camera repeatedly, getting closer each time. Always during the late night hours. Sometimes I drive past Corporate Park West around 3 a.m., just curious about who's working there now. The security office is always lit up, and I can usually see someone sitting at the desk monitoring the wall of cameras. I wonder if they've started seeing themselves yet, walking alongside David and me and all the other guards who've worked that shift. I wonder how long it takes before they realize they're watching their own future, walking the same route that security guards have been walking at Corporate Park West for years, even after their shifts are supposed to end. I wonder if anyone will ever figure out how to break the cycle, or if that job will just keep posting forever, cycling through guards who quit after a few months of watching themselves walk toward whatever destination we're all heading for in Building C. Story 8. The delivery truck that came every night at 3:33 a.m. I hid behind a shipping container and watched what came off that truck at 3:33 a.m. The next morning, I was fired with a severance package and an NDA. I was too terrified not to sign. 3 months later, I still checked the locks on my doors twice every night. I had been working the loading dock at Meridian Distribution for about 2 months when I started noticing the pattern. Every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., a delivery truck would back up to Bay 4, stay for 27 minutes, then leave. No paperwork, no driver I ever saw, no company markings on the truck. Meridian was a massive operation, 24-hour distribution center handling shipments for retailers throughout the region. My shift ran from midnight to 8 a.m., managing incoming freight, sorting packages, and preparing outbound shipments for the morning drivers. Most nights I worked alone except for occasional supervisors checking on progress. The loading dock had 12 bays, each equipped with hydraulic doors and conveyor systems for efficient cargo handling. During my shift, we'd typically see 3 or 4 scheduled deliveries from partner companies, overnight freight from major retailers, time-sensitive medical supplies, perishable goods that needed to be processed before dawn. All legitimate deliveries came with advance notice, shipping manifests, and proper documentation. Drivers checked in at the security office, presented their credentials, and followed established protocols for unloading and verification. But the truck at Bay 4 was different. My first week, I assumed it was part of the normal schedule I hadn't learned yet. New employee, still figuring out the routine. But when I asked my supervisor, Karen, about the 3:33 delivery, she seemed confused. Bay 4? Nothing scheduled for that time slot. I described what I'd observed. Unmarked white truck backing up precisely at 3:33, staying for about half an hour, leaving without any interaction with dock personnel. Probably one of our automated partnerships, Karen said. Some companies have new systems where everything's handled electronically. Truck arrives, automated systems process the shipment. Driver never has to get out. That made sense. The distribution industry was constantly adopting new technologies to streamline operations. Automated delivery systems, electronic manifests, minimal human interaction. It was the direction everything was heading. But I started paying closer attention to Bay 4 during the late night hours. The truck arrived like clockwork, always 3:33 a.m. Exactly. Always the same white truck with no visible company logos or identifying marks. I'd hear the backup beepers, see the bay door automatically open, then hear the sounds of cargo being unloaded, mechanical lifts, conveyor systems, boxes being moved. But I never saw a driver, never saw anyone supervising the unloading, never saw what was actually being delivered. After a few weeks, I noticed something else. The smell. Starting around 3:45 a.m., about 10 minutes into the delivery process, there would be a chemical odor coming from Bay 4. Not industrial cleaning supplies or normal warehouse smells, but something sharper, more acrid. Like burning plastic mixed with something organic that I couldn't identify. The smell would linger for about an hour after the truck left, then gradually fade by morning. But it was strong enough that I started bringing a small fan to my workstation to keep air circulating away from that area. I asked Karen about the smell during one of our shift meetings. Chemical deliveries to Bay 4? She checked her clipboard of scheduled shipments. No chemical deliveries listed. Bay 4 is usually reserved for textiles and consumer goods. I suggested. Could be. Some of the automated systems use industrial-grade sanitizers. But when Karen checked with the scheduling office, she found something odd. According to the manifest system, Bay 4 wasn't assigned to any company during the 3:33 a.m. time slot. That delivery window was listed as unscheduled maintenance access, a generic placeholder for facility upkeep and equipment testing. Must be some kind of internal operation, Karen concluded. Probably facility management handling equipment maintenance or system updates. I accepted that explanation for another week, but my curiosity was growing. The truck came with such precise timing, the unloading process sounded so organized and efficient, but nobody seemed to know exactly what was being delivered or who was handling it. During my 6th week, I decided to get a closer look at the operation. I positioned myself near Bay 3 where I could see Bay 4 without being obvious about watching. At 3:33 a.m., the white truck arrived on schedule, backed up to the loading dock, and the bay door opened automatically. What I saw confused me more than it explained anything. The truck's cargo area was full of large, sealed containers, metal boxes about the size of coffins, each one labeled with codes I couldn't read from a distance. Mechanical arms from inside the warehouse were removing the containers and placing them on conveyor belts that disappeared into the building. But there was definitely no driver. The truck cab was empty, windows dark, no sign of human involvement in the process. The entire delivery was being handled by automated systems, robotic unloading equipment that moved with mechanical precision. The chemical smell was stronger when I was closer to Bay 4. It wasn't just acrid anymore. There was definitely something organic underneath it, something that reminded me of a biology lab or a medical facility. Preservation chemicals maybe, or industrial disinfectants. After 27 minutes, exactly as always, the unloading was complete. The bay door closed and the truck pulled away without any human interaction. But this time I followed the conveyor belt to see where those containers were taken. I could hear machinery running inside, processing whatever had been delivered, but I didn't have access to see what was happening. The next night I tried a different approach. Instead of watching the unloading, I positioned myself where I could see the truck arrive and leave, trying to get a better look at identifying information. As the truck backed up to Bay 4, I got close enough to see the license plate. It was a government plate, federal, not state. S. That changed everything. This wasn't a commercial delivery or maintenance operation. This was some kind of federal shipment handled through automated systems processed in a restricted area of the warehouse that regular employees weren't supposed to access. I started researching Meridian Distribution's client list and government contracts. What I found was mostly routine stuff: postal service partnerships, military supply contracts, emergency management logistics. I realized that Meridian wasn't just a regular distribution center. They were also handling some kind of government operation, probably related to medical waste or biological materials that required special processing and disposal. That would explain the chemical smell, the automated handling, the restricted access, and the federal license plate. It was probably perfectly legitimate. Medical waste disposal was a necessary service, and it made sense to handle it during overnight hours when regular operations weren't affected. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong about the operation. The secrecy, the fact that even supervisors didn't seem to know about it, the way the entire process was designed to avoid human contact. On my 8th week, I made the decision that ended my employment at Meridian Distribution. Instead of just watching the delivery, I hid behind shipping containers near Bay 4 and waited to see exactly what was in those metal containers when they were opened in the processing area. At 3:33 a.m., the truck arrived as usual. I watched the automated unloading, saw the containers disappear into the restricted area, then carefully made my way to a service corridor that provided a view into the processing facility through a small window. What I saw inside made me understand why everything was automated, why no regular employees were involved, and why the operation was conducted in complete secrecy. The containers weren't carrying medical waste or biological materials for disposal. They were carrying people, not living people, but bodies that were being processed by machinery I couldn't fully comprehend. Robotic systems were removing organs, cataloging tissue samples, preparing materials that were packaged and loaded onto different conveyor belts heading to other parts of the facility. It was an automated organ harvesting and processing operation, running inside a distribution center where nobody would question the smell of chemicals or the sound of machinery running at night. I watched for maybe 5 minutes before I couldn't take any more and had to leave. The next morning, I went straight to Karen's office to report what I'd seen. But Karen wasn't there. Instead, I was met by 2 men in suits who knew my name and had apparently been waiting for me. "Mr. Johnson," one of them said calmly. I tried to explain what I'd witnessed, but they held up a hand to stop me. "What you saw last night was a classified federal operation related to national health security." They handed me a severance package worth 6 months' salary and a legal document that I was told to review carefully. "This non-disclosure agreement extends your existing confidentiality obligations indefinitely," the second man explained. "I've never spoken about what I saw at Meridian Distribution, and I signed the NDA because I was too scared of the legal consequences to refuse. But I've done some research on missing persons in our area, and there are patterns that disturb me. People who disappear without explanation, bodies that are never found, cases where authorities conclude that individuals simply chose to start new lives somewhere else. The numbers are higher than they should be in a region with a major automated processing facility running mysterious federal operations every night. I don't know if what I witnessed was legal or illegal, authorized or rogue, but I know that somewhere, every night at 3:33 a.m., trucks are delivering human remains to facilities where machines process them with the efficiency of any other industrial operation. And I know that some secrets are protected by people with enough power to make problems disappear as completely as the bodies being delivered to Bay 4. I still wake up at 3:33 a.m. sometimes, and I listen for the sound of trucks backing up to loading docks in the distance, wondering how many facilities like Meridian are operating in plain sight, handling shipments that nobody is supposed to see.